Which ones do you refer to?
Well, here's one. I mean, let's take political participation. It's a mystery, but here's the fact. We know that over the last 50 years, political participation has gone down. If you track something like voting in presidential elections, which is easy to track, what you'll see is that everybody is voting less now than they voted in the presidential election in 1960. Of course, there's going to be an election a month from now, and perhaps that historical trend will change, because this is perhaps a very close election to which a lot of people are paying a lot of attention. But between 1960 and 2000, participation has generally gone down. However, if you look by income at who's participating, what you find is that it's the lowest income families who have dropped out of the system at the highest rate. That is, they're participating at an even lower rate than they were, that the decline amongst the low income families is the greater than others. Now, if you ask, well, what's the effect of that? The effect is that since lower income families are voting less, the income of the median voter, of the people who are voting, is going up. And one of the studies that we supported shows that the income of the median voter has gone up from about the 53rd percentile to something like the 60th percentile. That means that on the whole, the group that's voting is increasingly more wealthy than the entire population.
And votes accordingly. You know, two things. You threw in a moment ago, when I asked what the factors were involved here. You said, well, of course, there's no moral judgment. You were sort of saying as if this just had to happen. Now, do you mean that? No moral judgment here? No one to blame?
All right, that's
no judgment.
That's a fair question. As the income distribution stretches apart, and people's interests also stretch apart, the difference between the interests of the lower middle class and the poor and the wealthy. If people simply pursue their interests, then it may be the case that we have a society which is less empathetic, let's put it that way, that in which the interests of the well-off and the interests of the less well-off stretch apart, are quite different, and people have difficulty making that imaginative leap to what the lives of the others are like. Therefore, the families in the upper tail of the income distribution may understand less and less what the problems of the poor, the near poor, and the middle class really are. They may be less interested in supporting the kinds of public resources, like, say, universal health care, that the rest of the population would benefit from. Now, should we make a moral judgment? Well, okay. The question, as a social scientist, I guess we don't deal so much in moral judgments. You could say, as I have, they're less empathetic because they're sharing fewer experiences. As their lives become more and more different than the lives of the rest of us, they're sharing fewer experiences, they have less empathy, and they're more likely to serve their own interests, not seeing that those interests are antithetic to the interests of the lower class.
On an unkinder note, one can say, let them eat cake. That's a moral translation, it seems to me, of the kind of analysis that you just offered. It's understandable that here you feel this way, and when you move into a higher income area, you have fewer concerns back there. But those are moral judgments, and we made different moral judgments in the 1930s.
I'll go this far. I've been surprised that our political process has been as short-sighted as it appears to have been. Society, after all, is a collaboration. You do what you do, I do what I do. We couldn't be sitting here in the studio doing what we do unless we were surrounded by technicians who were making this program, unless people were taking care of the building that we're in unless people were cleaning the street. It's a collaboration. To support that collaboration, we need to make sure that everybody has a stake in doing their part. To do that, we need to make sure they have meaningful jobs and meaningful work, and that they receive remuneration for that work that's fair and decent and provides a basic standard of living. If we don't do that, If we simply look at consumer surplus, that is, we simply try to drive down prices and wages as far as we can, we may get to the point where we have a society that doesn't work very well.
Okay, you're a real social scientist. I'm not. Therefore, you can put it in these terms. You can talk about being short-sighted. You can talk about the dynamics. And I think it's mean-spirited. We're talking about the same thing. We're talking about the same actions that have the same results. But, well, I was particularly interested in one of the papers in your recent Carnegie forum on this subject. One of the authors quoted Robert Samuelson in 2001 saying that if Americans couldn't abide rising inequality, we'd now be demonstrating in the streets. And I thought there was a lot of wisdom packed in this, because it seems to be saying, hey, we can go on and on this way. There isn't enough reaction to make it important for us to reverse the process that's taken place since the 1960s, 70s. How do you react to that? Yeah. Do we give a damn?
There are all kinds of possible answers. Let's try a couple. One is that in the last 40 years, you've had a situation in which the rich have gotten very much richer. In real terms, maybe the top 20% has real income gains on the order of 80%. The median hasn't done that badly. The median's income gain, the median family in the middle, their income gains in real terms have been on the order of 35 or 40%. This is not a recipe for revolution in the streets.
But what about the last group?
Okay, what about the last group? You tend not to get revolutions, I think, when the poor are doing very badly. You would, as a historian, know better perhaps than I, but one time you get them is when there are rising expectations and those expectations aren't met. I'm not sure where the expectations of the poor are. It seems to me that the fact that they're not participating politically possibly means they don't think there's much in the political system for them. They don't see much difference between the two parties. To the extent that they don't participate, of course, they won't be represented by the political system. One of the papers that we've supported, not in the book, estimates the degree to which political representatives are paying attention to their constituents. And roughly the calculation is that they pay about 3 times as much attention to the interests of their well-off constituents as to their poorer constituents, in terms of their roll call votes, actually. So in all these ways, the poor seem to be left out of the political system and to some extent suffering in the economic system, but so far they don't seem to be acting in any collective way. Part of the problem may be that there's a high rate of immigration in this country, and that a lot of what's going on at the lower end of the labor market is immigrants coming in and taking jobs that other people, that native-born Americans won't do or don't do.
Without feeling that they're so much at the bottom of the pack.
Exactly the point I was going to make. That's right. They're happy with those jobs. They were better. The jobs they're comparing to are what they would have had in their home country. Compared to that, they're doing somewhat better, so they form a rather docile, contented labor force, even though their actual economic returns are rather small.
Dr. Wanner, it seems so strange to me, but maybe you've really answered the question there, only it's going to be a temporary answer. As the immigrants and the others who are at least accepting of what they have or are getting here, they're functioning in a very open society in one way. It is communications, it is television that is opened for full view the way the middle class and the way the upper, richer groups live. And that's in full view of those who are not living so well. And I wonder if one doesn't have to anticipate that at some point we're not going to continue to live as high off the hog without a lot of disturbance down at the bottom.
I agree with that. And that's what I had in mind when I said I thought our political process was remarkably short-sighted, and that we weren't reminding ourselves that society is a collaboration in which everyone has got to benefit. But let me go back to this question of why the poor or the near poor aren't doing anything much, aren't recognizing the problems associated with rising inequality. Groups don't act politically by themselves in a vacuum. There have to be what social scientists call mobilizing institutions. Institutions which help educate people about their own economic self-interest and which inform them about reasonable ways to act or effective ways to act collectively. So if you look at other countries and look for countries in which the poor do participate politically, what you find are things like high rates of unionization, where the unions are involved in bringing workers who otherwise might not participate into the system. And as unionization has gone down here, that's why things are, when you ask me what's the problem, and I said, well, everything, it's a recipe, everything's put together. Deunionization is also connected to declining rates of political participation among low-income families.
I wish I hadn't just gotten a signal that we have less than a minute left, because what I'd really like to talk with you at some length is the matter of the intellectual classes that have traditionally identified and led those who perhaps didn't see the lot they were actually, that was actually theirs. The intellectuals aren't at the barricades saying, come on, are they?
I agree. And I don't know the answer to that question. A historian might. I suspect it has a lot to do with the failure of state socialism, particularly in Eastern Europe and in the former Soviet Union, that intellectuals who thought at one point they had an answer, perhaps now are not so confident of what that answer might be. I personally believe, as I guess obviously comes out in this conversation, that our version of capitalism needs some real design changes. But I cannot tell you exactly what those design changes are. I think that's the project for the next generation.
It's the project, certainly the subject for another program. Okay. Thank you for joining me so much today, Dr. Wanner.
I enjoyed talking.
And thanks, too, to you in the audience. I hope you'll join us again next time. And if you would like a transcript of today's program, please send $4 in check or money order to the Open Mind, P.O. Box 7977, FDR Station, New York, New York, 10150. Meanwhile, as an old friend used to say, good night and good luck.